Hey everyone, let's take a trip to an alternate reality where From Software didn't release Elden Ring. Instead of taking Dark Souls and expanding upon its systems, its world, and its combat like they did in Elden Ring, they instead chose to refine what had worked in Dark Souls and Bloodborne. What kind of game could they have made if they had stuck with a linear world? What if instead of transforming weapons like in Bloodborne, they gave you the option to mix and match both your blades and your handles to make unique creations? Well, you would have Lies of P, and this is my review. Lies of P wasn't developed by From Software. No, it's made by NeoWiz Games and Round 8 Studios, a South Korean developer. If you had told me when I started Lies of P that it was made by ex-employees of From Software looking to make a Souls-like, I would have believed you. Lies of P is one of the best Souls-likes you're going to get outside of the Dark Souls series. It's the love child of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, with fast-paced combat, interconnected levels with shortcuts, and a linear story.
Can you hear me? Geppetto's puppet, we need your help.
Let's start my review, like I always do, by talking about the technicals of Lies of P. I played it on the Xbox Series X through Game Pass, and it ran flawlessly at 60 FPS. I had no bugs, no glitches, or FPS drops. The game didn't crash a single time. There are two graphical options to choose from on console: the performance mode that targets 60 FPS, and the quality mode that increases the graphics at the cost of FPS. I chose the performance mode since, like most Souls games, you're going to want every FPS you can get to react to attacks. From discussing the technicals, it's an easy transition to make into talking about the graphics. Lies of P looks fantastic. It uses the Unreal Engine 4 and everything from the character models to the environments look incredible. Unfortunately, it is awfully dark. You do have a light that you carry with you, a lantern similar to the one you get in Elden Ring, but this game makes it essential since most of it takes place at night or in dark caves. If you go into Lies of P expecting to see the sun shining down on a city and light reflecting off of pools of water and all that stuff, forget about it. The world of Lies of P is dark and depressing, which makes sense for the narrative. It also doesn't hurt that it saves on the FPS. If you've played Bloodborne, then you know exactly what the world of Lies of P is going to look like. Prepare to suffer. Alright, let's discuss what you're going to be doing in Lies of P. It's a Souls-like, meaning it has all the things you would expect from a Dark Souls-like game. Tight melee combat, collecting sparkles of light that turn into items in your inventory, and slaying monsters to earn XP to upgrade your character, buy items, or enhance your weapons. I'm not going to go into what exactly a Souls-like game is. If you've played a Dark Souls game, you already know what to expect. But let's talk about what Lies of P plays like. It's a really good Souls-like. It's as if the developers took Dark Souls and Bloodborne and said, let's do that but make it even better. As I said at the start of the video, Lies of P feels like a game that was made by an alternate universe From Software that, for some reason, had lost the license to Dark Souls, so they made a new IP. But From Software does something that other Souls-like developers don't tend to do. They innovate and are willing to change how to do things. I recently played Elden Ring, and going into Lies of P after playing Elden Ring is like stepping back in time by about 5 years. Combat is slower and clunkier compared to Elden Ring. And I'm sorry, but this review is going to have a lot of references to Bloodborne, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring, since Lies of P is unashamedly influenced by them. Combat in Lies of P is clearly closer to the slow, methodical movement and attack style of Dark Souls, but it does lack the shields to hide behind that was a staple of early From Software games. Instead, all your weapons are two-handed, and while you can block, the amount of damage that is reduced depends on the weapon you're using. But there is the risk versus reward system that Bloodborne had. If you take damage, you can counterattack and get that lost health back if you're quick enough. So do you stab forward and try to get back that chunk of red that you lost? Or do you stay turtled up and prepare for the next attack? To make things more interesting, there's a perfect guard that you can do. If you time your block at the right moment, this allows you to not only block the attack, but not take any damage to it. It also adds to the stagger mechanic that enemies have. To go with your blocking, you have a dodge roll that, I'll be quite frank, sucks. Rather than a roll that you would expect with large iframes in Elden Ring, your dodge is very ineffectual at the beginning of the game unless you upgrade it later. Your weapons have special abilities similar to the Ashes of War in Elden Ring. Both the blade of your weapon and the handle have separate abilities, and you earn Fable, which is similar to focus points by attacking or blocking. It's the mixing and matching of the equipment that is the most interesting thing in Lies of P. Swapping out a handle means a different Fable art, along with a different attack style and stats for your weapon. Stats can be upgraded through the use of different items. For example, increasing a B-rated item for an A in another category at the cost of a decrease somewhere else. It allows for a lot of experimentation. And luckily there is a training section of the hub area that you can try out your different weapon combinations until you find one that you like. Unfortunately, there is no way to refund your spent enhancing materials, meaning that until you get to the end of the game where you can purchase upgrade materials from the vendors, you need to be careful about what you buy. So since combat is so important in Lies of P, let's talk about the enemies. There are 3 types: humans, puppets, and carcasses. There aren't many humans left in Krat, the city that Lies of P is set in. Most of them have died, leading the puppets as the first enemies you're going to be facing. These enemies are generally slow, although they do speed up in the later parts of the game. Puppets are weak to electricity and have attacks that are usually telegraphed far in advance. Next up are the few humans that are left. The human enemies you fight are trained stalkers, who are people who fight the puppets and other monsters. They wear animal masks and are some of the toughest enemies you're going to face. They are mostly mini-bosses and a few bosses, and they hit fast and hard. If you want a comparison, think of the red invaders from Elden Ring or Dark Souls, and you're going to know what to expect from these human enemies. Lastly are the carcasses. Like the name implies, these are dead bodies brought back to life by an infection. They are weak to fire, are creepy as hell, and they often have tentacles that shoot out at you. The puppets and the carcasses fight each other, and mostly if you're facing one type of enemy in a level, there won't be other types in that area. Lies of P lacks armor stats of the Dark Souls series. Instead, you have a variety of parts that P can equip to provide bonuses. But if you're interested in the look of P, you can still equip different outfits, although they just don't give you any stat increases. There's a hub area called the Krat Hotel that is Lies of P's version of the Firelink Shrine. Most of the areas can be reached from this hub, and you can also fast travel from Stargazers. These Stargazers are the bonfires or sites of grace comparison. Now, if you just played Elden Ring, you're going to be spoiled and may find it hard to go back to the old Dark Souls way of doing things. When you respawn, there's no Stakes of Marika or Sites of Grace in front of most of the boss encounters. No, instead you're going to be backtracking a bit. There are usually shortcuts in place, so that it isn't too crazy to get back to where you died, but if you aren't unlocking them, expect to make a long track back to your Ergo. Several of the bosses do have bonfires outside of them, but most don't. Lies of P's levels are pretty short though. It may not feel like it when you're playing them because they're so dense and packed with enemies that you need to kill, since this game is much more linear than Elden Ring, and you need the XP, or Ergo as this game calls it. But when you die, and you're running back to where you left your Ergo, you realize how short these levels are sometimes, and how often they are filled with difficult bullshit, which is a good segue into the difficulty. All right, we can't talk about the gameplay without discussing the difficulty. Most people are going to ask before they play Lies of P, is this game hard? I mean, it's a Souls-like, so there is a certain expectation of a difficulty. But Lies of P is oftentimes harder than Dark Souls. Difficulty comes in 3 main parts, in my opinion. The first part is the classic Souls-like, get good. When to block or dodge, when to strike and backstab, how to parry or stagger a boss in order to deal critical damage. There are so many little parts of combat that takes a lot of experience to learn and a lot more to master. Lies of P is a lot less forgiving than Dark Souls or Bloodborne. There are no shields to hide behind, no alternate routes to take or magic to use. I played Demon Souls when it first came out in North America. I had heard about this hard game from Japan, but I thought it was just people over-exaggerating. When I played it, it was like hitting my head against a brick wall. I couldn't get past the first level. But when I eventually succeeded, I died repeatedly on the second level. But when I was talking to my brother about how hard this game was, his response to the difficulty was completely different. He said, just use magic, it makes everything so much more easy. And it did. I respec to a magic build and crushed everything in my path. Lies of P isn't like that. This is a melee-focused game like Bloodborne. Sure, there are different ways to build, but they're still fundamentally the same. Which brings us to the second part of the difficulty, the build and equipment you use. Lies of P have weapons that are clearly better than others. Even after nearly a year of patches, if you do a quick search for the best build to beat the game, then you can get a leg up on beating Lies of P. I didn't do any research going in, and my builds weren't bad, but there were definitely times when I felt lacking. So I played around with swapping blades and hilts, and oh my god, does it make a difference. Enemies that I struggled against before were nothing now. I was killing bosses on my first attempt. What I'm saying is, a lot of the difficulty of Lies of P depends entirely how you spec your character. What weapons you use, what handle you give it, how many upgrades that weapon have. Normal weapons go up to +10, and special weapons you get from Boss Ergo or Boss Souls go up to +5. Then there are the regular throwing items that melt enemies when you spam them. Or, and this is an interesting part of combat, the grindstones you use on your weapon. Your weapons have a durability that goes down as you fight. Go too long without a grindstone, and your durability tanks and you do less damage. But there are also special attributes you can add to your grindstone, things like fire, acid, and shock. These can give you a huge advantage against bosses that are weak to them. So if you're having a lot of trouble with Lies of P, then look up a good build online. There's nothing wrong with that. This game is still plenty difficult with the best builds. All you're doing really is giving yourself a leg up. Which brings us to the third reason of why Lies of P is so difficult. The bullshit. Alright, remember Blighttown in Dark Souls where there are ledges everywhere and the entire place is filled with poison? Well, one of the developers of Lies of P certainly did, because it's filled with stuff like that. There are so many ledges and narrow gaps and boards over falling areas and pits. Enemies love to walk around open holes, or better yet, they place range enemies next to nearly every place that you're walking on a narrow wooden board over this death pit. Then there are encounters that take place in poison water, and there are tons of different status effects, some that even kill you instantly, like disruption. There's overheat, shock, decay that kills both you and your weapon durability, poisons, etc. Then there are the classic multiple enemies in small space that trap you in a corner. There's dogs that are stronger than any enemy in the game, enemies that hide behind doors, behind crates, behind walls, or even on the ceiling. There are bosses that have an immense amount of poise, so they barely ever stagger, but P gets interrupted in his attacks every time he is hit because his poise is terrible. There are bosses that combo endlessly, have area attacks, they have unbreakable lock-ons that never leave you no matter how many times you dodge. There are bosses with AoE status effects that constantly decay you or turn your weapons into mush, or have a disruptant effect around it so you die if you're next to them for too long. The list goes on. This game has a ton of stuff that isn't just get good and learn how to play as so much as power through and suffer. The difficulty of Lies of P is going to turn off a ton of players. When I got the achievement for beating the game, and let me be clear, I got the easiest ending, not the hard ending that makes you fight a different enemy at the end so you can get the good ending. No, I just got the regular bad ending. Only 4% of people on Xbox got that easier ending. And I think for the harder ending, more people got it, but I still think it's less than 10%. Now, a lot of people did play this game on PlayStation 5 and Steam, so those numbers aren't all the players in existence, but it gives you a good indication of how many people actually got the ending. 4% for the easiest ending, the bad ending. Souls-like games are hard, yes, but From Software seems to be leaning away from that, or at least giving the players the ability to deal with it in different ways. It's no longer about press the parry button at the exact time required or you lose. It's, hey, use this sword if you want a challenge. Oh, it's really hard? Then just go to this other area and grind for XP and upgrade your weapons, then come back and stomp that boss. Or use magic if you want an easier time, or use consumables. There are so many different play styles. So the answer to, is Lies of P hard, is yes, it's very hard. If you don't play Souls games, I wouldn't recommend starting with this one. The perfect Souls games to start with is actually Elden Ring, in my opinion, because it gives you so many different play styles.
Finally, we meet, son.
I'm just going to briefly touch on the story since I don't want to give away too many spoilers in this review. It's really good, although it is very dark and depressing. Unlike Dark Souls or Elden Ring, Lies of P is a bit more straightforward. It still has a ton of information found in items descriptions, but there are lore pickups littered about. What makes it easier to follow is that it's linear. There are times when characters just straight up tell you what's going on. You play as P, a puppet that wakes up alone on a train. Your maker Geppetto is gone, and Sophia is talking to you through your mind. You need to go to the Krat Hotel, which is one of the only safe places left in Krat. So briefly, Krat is a city where a certain mineral is found that allows Urgo, or souls from Dark Souls, to gather. Urgo is used to make puppets come to life. Sort of like AI, these puppets are very simple and follow simple commands. They are kept in line through the Grand Convention, which are the laws that govern them. Sometimes these puppets come to life and gain sentience, since the fuel they used is essentially human souls. At the start of the game, the puppets have started to go crazy and killed everyone in Krat. Like most of the Souls-like games, you're walking through the aftermath rather than the main event. P makes it to the Krat Hotel, killing puppets and sometimes crazy people on the way. There he finds out that Geppetto is missing and you need to find him. To go along with all of these puppets going crazy, there is a disease that is affecting people and making them turn to stone. It's a secret that's revealed throughout the story, but it's not a big deal. It's caused by Urgo. I mean, you're going to figure that out anyway. There are also groups of people experimenting on humans, and P has to fight these undead mutation monsters called carcasses. That's pretty much the story in a nutshell. It's less about P's goal of becoming a real boy, and more about P trying to find his way through this hellhole that the world has become. The lore is well thought out and interesting, and the story has plenty of twists and turns, which I won't spoil here. But like I said, it's really dark and depressing. This isn't a story of P saving a city. The city is already dead. It's about saving the few people that are left. And most of them aren't even people, but other puppets. It's about what it means to be a human and how humans are sometimes more monstrous than any of the monsters P fights. And here we are, at the conclusion of another review. Lies of P is a solid 8.5 out of 10. And the question you may be asking is, why did I take marks off if this is such a great game? Well, for one, I took marks off because of its difficulty. Not that it's too difficult, but sometimes it's an unfair level of difficulty. But aside from that, Lies of P does improve upon things that were offered in Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Like I said at the start of the video, it's almost a what if of a From Software game, if they didn't choose to move forward in their own gameplay and design in Elden Ring. But that's a problem that I find a lot of the Souls-likes have. They focus on trying to make their games as close as possible to Dark Souls or Bloodborne, but they don't want to change things up too much. From Software took a chance with Elden Ring, and sure, it did some things poorly, but it did a whole lot right as well. Lies of P plays it pretty close to the roots with Dark Souls and Bloodborne. So should you check it out? Sure, if you want a hard game and you enjoy Souls-likes. If this is your first one, maybe practice a bit with some of the other From Software titles before sinking your teeth into this one. If you have Game Pass, it's currently offered there, and it's worth getting a month to try it out. Thanks for watching. Leave a like on the video and make sure to subscribe for more content. I'm really interested to hear if you played Lies of P and what you thought about it.